Hello, everybody. Welcome. Parshas Shemos. So we are beginning a new Sefer Shemos. Bereshis was very exciting, and here we on to another exciting part of the Torah, and also heavy. We're in exile. We're in slavery in Egypt. That's the beginning of Sefer Shemos. And let us begin. So I am focusing on a specific lesson that we can learn that I think is extremely relevant and very powerful. So the topic of today is unity and how crucial it is. And we'll see why it's even more important that as a Jewish person, it's more important to be in unity with each other than even what you believe. So let's meaning like how religious you are, even if you believe in God, you don't believe in God, what does God care about more than anything? So let's see. Vayomer l'rasha lama sakereach. This is the pasuk we're gonna highlight. Again, if you're following along on the link that I said you, I'll put it on the YouTube. If you want to follow along in Hebrew, you could look in the description in the YouTube description box. So here we go. So in this parsha Seinu Misaperes, it tells us how Moshe, I'm not going to read every word, sometimes I'm just going to say it, how Moshe grew up, as we know, in the palace, right? And once he grew up, he knew he was Jewish, and he wanted to see how his sisters and brothers were faring. He wanted to know how they were doing. So he goes out of his bubble. He goes out, and that itself is an amazing thing if you think about it. Here he is, the most privileged child in the entire Egypt, very comfortable. And he's like, no, I'm a Jewish person. My brothers are suffering. I want to be part of their suffering. I want to see their suffering. And honestly, now that I think about it, isn't that a beautiful lesson for us today as well? Like, we can't live in our own bubble, even if we're not in Eretz Yisrael, even if we don't have a family member that's on the front lines. We have to go out of our comfort zone to feel the pain of our brothers and sisters. So what does he see? He sees a Mitzri man hitting a Jewish person. And as we know, Moshe kills him, looks both ways, thinks that nobody's watching, buries him, and thinks it's so not only does he go out to fare, but he wants to actually, protect his brother that he sees is in trouble, risking his very life to do so, of course. So the next day he goes out again. That wasn't enough. He goes out again. And this time he sees two Jewish people quarreling with each other. As we know, these men are Dasan and Aviram. And he says, Vayomer l'rasha lama sakareyacha. And he says to them, so why are you hitting your brother? This is, your family. Why are you hitting your friend, your friend? Why are you hitting your friend? This is not okay. He gives him a little rebuke. Al Kain, he shivlo hayehudi. So the Jewish person who hit his friend said to him, "Oh, halahargeini ata omer kaasher harakta es mitzri? Are you gonna kill me the way that you killed the Egyptian?" Ouch. First of all, this is bad news on so many levels. And the very first level that we usually read it as is, Moshe realizes, shoots, acheno dahadavar. This thing has become known. I thought I did it while nobody was looking. Turns out somebody knows what happened. They saw it. And they're asking me, am I gonna kill them too? And that means that the thing is known, acheno dahadavar. This thing has been known that it's public knowledge, which means that this person was a tattletale. This person was telling on Moshe. And from the next psukim, what we see is that what's clear from the narrative is that these people themselves, Dasan and Aviram, either one of them or both of them, witnessed what happened, and they were going to inform on Moshe to Paro. They were telling Paro that he had killed an Egyptian. And the pasuk says, Vayira Moshe, and Moshe was afraid. Vayomer, and he said, Acheno dahadavar. I know now this thing has become known. So very, very simply, he's afraid for his life, right? He killed a Mitzri, not okay, and an Egyptian. And now that this thing has become known, he's afraid for his life. And sure enough, as we know, the next pasuk, Paro finds out and he has to run away to Midian. And Moshe runs away because his life was in danger. But the Midrash explains that Moshe was not just worried about his own fate, the fact that his life was now in danger because this thing has become known. We're talking about Moshe, who's going to become the leader of the Jewish people, who left the bubble of his palace, his comfort zone, to go see the suffering and be with his brothers and sisters in their suffering. We're talking about a leader here. So he was not just worried about that his own life was in danger. He was worried about something much deeper. He was concerned about the nation as a whole. The Midrash tells us, Yesh beinechem Lashon Hara. The fact that a Jewish person can tell on me what I did to save another Jewish person's life? There are informers, there are tattletellers, there's Lashon Hara, which means when one Jew speaks badly about another Jew. There's Lashon Hara amongst the Jewish people. The Midrash says, V'he'ach atem re'uyin legeula. How will they be worthy of redemption? That's what Moshe was concerned about. Vayira Moshe. Moshe was afraid. He was afraid for the fate of the Jewish people because he saw that they were telling on each other. Another Midrash echoes this same idea and explains that Moshe couldn't understand, why are the Jewish people in exile in the first place? Haya Moshe maharher belibo. He was thinking in his heart, Va'omer machatu Yisrael this is shenish sab avdu, some version of that word, mikol ha'umos. How do the Jewish people deserve to be enslaved amongst the nations? Why are they, how are they even enslaved? And how come they're not being redeemed? What's going on here? And the Midrash continues, Kevan sheshama dvarav, when he heard their words, the words of Dasan and Aviram, are you going to kill us like you killed the Mitzri? Amar, he said to himself, Lashon Hara. Yesh beinechem. There's Lashon Hara between them, meaning between the Jewish people, amongst the Jewish people. Hey, how are they going to be worthy of redemption? This is what Moshe was so concerned about. Now, we're going to ask a question here. Like, Lashon Hara, that's what he was worried about? Because we know from many sources that in Mitzrayim, the Jewish people were Ovdei Avodah Zarah. They served Avodah Zarah. They were idol worshippers. They were not all following Torah mitzvos as they should be, and even they weren't even all believing in the oneness of God. They were falling into the trap, the Yetzer Hara of the time was Avodah Zarah, and they were falling into that trap. And yet Moshe knew that, but he didn't say, "Oh, why are they not worried? Why are they not worthy of redemption? It's because of Avodah Zarah." Nope. He wasn't worried about that. That was not preventing redemption. That was not preventing their ability to have Yetzias Mitzrayim, to leave Egypt, to be redeemed. But rather, he wondered, what were they doing? How did they get stuck in Galus? Right? Even though he knew they were involved in Avodah Zarah, like the worst of the worst crimes for a Jewish person is to serve idols, right? To believe in anything other than God. That's literally what defines us as a nation, or so we thought, right? We thought that what defines us as a nation is that we believe in God. But listen to this. Moshe was wondering, why are we still stuck in Galus? No, not because of Avodah Zarah. That's not the problem. Rather, when he saw that they were telling on each other, that was the issue. So our question is like this. Is the hate of Lashon Hara, is, right, this telling on each other, this disunity amongst the Jewish people, is this worse, Chamor, is this worse from idol worship? Like we said, idol worship is the worst of the worst. It's one of the 3 cardinal sins that a person should die for, give up their life for, rather than transgress. But Lashon Hara is worse than idol worship? That this is specifically the thing that Moshe is concerned about is going to prevent them from being redeemed? So, we have an incredible explanation to this. You see, the Rambam in Hilchos Avodah Zarah, he discusses in the halachas of idol worship, he actually goes through the history of the Jewish people. And he describes that, you see, the Avos bequeathed to their children this emunah in Hashem, this belief in one God. Abraham discovered monotheism, right? One God, not only one God, but that God is one with the whole world. And there's only one reality in the world, and that is God. And he gave over this emunah, this belief, this faith in Hashem to his children, right? To Yitzchak, to Yaakov, Yaakov to the Shvatim. And the Jewish people were defined by their belief in God. Now, if you rejected that belief, then you weren't considered part of Bnei Yisrael. How do we know that? Right? Yishmael was not considered part of Bnei Yisrael. Esav, not considered Bnei Yisrael. If you went off the path of the Avos, if you went off the path of Torah and mitzvos, then you're no longer part of Bnei Yisrael. So the Jewish people were defined up until this point as, in the words of the Rambam, Uma, a nation, shehi yoda'as es Hashem, that they know God. So we were defined by our relationship with Hashem. Ulam, but things changed. La'achar mikein, what happened? Arhu hayamim, these are the words of the Rambam. Arhu hayamim liyisrael b'Mitzrayim. Their days were lengthened. The Jewish people's days were lengthened in Mitzrayim. They were in Mitzrayim for such a long time. V'chazru lilmod ma'aseihem ula'avod kochavim kimosan. And they returned to the ways of idol worship. Because as we know, before the Avos, right, Abraham's own father had an idol shop, right? And he rejected idol worship to choose belief in Hashem, gave it to his children. Now Bnei Yisrael are in Mitzrayim, and they're worshiping idols again. Ve'az, but then what happened? The Rambam continues and says that Hashem, ubachar Hashem chose Yisrael linachala, as an inheritance. Hektiran b'mitzvos, and he crowned them with mitzvos. What does this mean? Mikan anu ro'im, from this we see, shekodem Yitzias Mitzrayim, before Yitzias Mitzrayim, before the Jewish people were in Egypt and then Hashem took us out of Egypt, Haisa hagdaras ha'uma, the characterization, the definition of the nation was connected with our belief in Hashem and acting on that belief, right? Living according to our belief in God. The fact that they didn't serve Avodah Zarah, but rather, right, they had Emunah in Hashem, Uma shehi yoda'as es Hashem. This is what characterized the Jewish people. Davar zeh nispatel begalas Mitzrayim. But then, shoots, what happens? They get to Mitzrayim and that is lost. That identification, that characterization becomes moot because they start serving Avodah Zarah again. And so then you can say, what makes them Jewish anymore? They lost their connection with Hashem. They lost their relationship, their knowledge of Hashem, right? Yodeya is also intimacy. Yada, like Adam yadas chava. I think those are the words, right? In Torah, to know is also to be intimate with. It's the intimacy of the Jewish people with Hashem, but they lost that intimacy. They lost that relationship. They lost that emunah. They went off, and so what makes them Jewish anymore? Ella she'az notzar davar chadash. Here we have a new reality, a new something that happens. HaKadosh Baruch Hu bachar ba'am Yisrael lo la'am. In the words that we saw in the Rambam, ubachar Hashem Yisrael lenachala. When Avraham was serving Hashem because of his belief in Hashem, and Yitzchak and Yaakov and the Shvatim were serving Hashem because they believed in God, that was one kind of relationship. We were choosing Hashem. But when we stop choosing Hashem, so that's it. Are we going to disintegrate into the world and there goes the Jewish people? No. Why not? Because Hashem then chose us. Even when we were not actively choosing Hashem, Hashem said, I want you anyway. You are my Jewish people. I want you to be mine, and I will choose you no matter where you're holding, where you're standing, what you believe, what you don't believe in. I choose you. And in fact, we know this is the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim. It's always referred to as the birth of a nation. When did we become Am Yisrael? When we left Egypt, when God chose us in Egypt, amongst all the other nations, Gai Mikerev Gai. We were just a nation amongst other nations, and God chose us, brought the plagues for us, saved us from Egypt, took us out, split the sea, brought us through the Midbar, gave us the Torah. God turned us into Am Yisrael. In fact, the first few words of this week's Parsha is the first time that the Torah uses the phrase B'nai Yisrael. Ve'ele Shemos B'nai Yisrael. Before the whole story of Egypt, how does this Parsha, as well as the Sefer of Shemos, how does it begin? God lists and counts the names of those who came down to Egypt. And we already had that counted before. How come again? Here we are. Hashem is showing us his love for the Jewish people and that he's choosing us as the Jewish people. And in fact, this is the prerequisite for surviving Galus, for surviving exile, for surviving the slavery of Egypt and the exile that we are in today. I just saw a beautiful shir from a few years ago by Rabbi Taub about how Shemos, knowing your name, meaning knowing who you are, having that Jewish identity is what keeps us through exile more than anything else. Why? Because if we don't know who we are, then who are the Jewish people? There will be no Jewish people if Jewish people don't know that they are Jewish people. So before we even get into the whole story of slavery and exile and then subsequently redemption, we begin by saying the Eila Shemos B'nai Yisrael. Hashem is showing us that what is most important is identifying as B'nai Yisrael. And here we have the first time in the Torah that we are called B'nai Yisrael. So here Hashem is choosing us as the Jewish people. And this is the birth of a nation. So therefore, what we see from this is that God choosing the Jewish people is not because of anything special about us. And it's not because of what we did, because as we just described, they weren't too great in Egypt, right? They lost their way. They lost their connection with Hashem. They lost their belief in Hashem. And sure enough, on their own merit, they would not have been worthy to be redeemed. They assimilated into society, and there's no Jewish people to be redeemed, except for the fact that God chose us, defined us, and characterized us by our by the definition of being Hashem's nation. And therefore the fact, so back to our question, how is it that Moshe was not concerned about the fact that the Jewish people were serving idols, right? They were Ovdei Avodah Zarah. He was not concerned that that was going to hinder them from redemption, because it wasn't about that, right? It wasn't an obstacle. It wasn't a blockage to being redeemed, because why? From what we see, that God at that point and throughout history, meaning since that point, from that point, God was not identifying us anymore by us choosing him, but rather because he chose us. And therefore, yes, Moshe was not afraid by the fact that the Jewish people were serving Avodah Zarah, but what was he afraid by? What did worry him and concern him? The fact that there was Lashon Hara. The fact that there was an expression of pirud halavavos, the words are here, this separation of hearts. In our hearts, there was disunity. And from that nechrad, from that, they were frightened. My mother is a wise woman, and hi, Mom. So, and she always taught me the power of Jewish unity, the importance of Jewish unity. And I remember that Erev Shabbos, the second days of Yantif, this past Sukkot, we were, about to take in Shabbos and Yantif, and my mother said, I'm concerned about the situation in Eretz Yisrael because there's so much lack of unity. I'm scared. Oh my gosh. Wow. Now, it's important to recognize that, as Manis Friedman explains, it's not, God forbid, that the fact that there was so much disunity prior to October 7th, that therefore God came in and punished us and said, oh, you're not being unified, so God forbid. No, it's very clear that nothing so terrible and awful can ever be called a punishment. We know that the Lubavitcher Rebbe was extremely against anybody calling the Holocaust, any form, connecting it to any form of anything the Jewish people could have ever done. Really? You're saying that God punishes us with such horrifying things? No, that's not the God that we believe in. We do not call it a punishment, God forbid. However, Manish Friedman explains, you can see it in such a natural way. If you're surrounded by enemies, and you start fighting amongst each other, the enemy notices a weakness, right? So that's a natural understanding of it, and they take advantage of the weakness. But here we're saying a spiritual understanding of what's happening. That pirud umachloka, separation and division, pogim, it harms, it touches on, it affects, it hurts, it damages. Be'etzem mehuso, in the essence, shel am Yisrael ka'am echad. It touches and harms the essence of the Jewish people being one nation. When there is division and separation amongst us, we are hurting ourselves, because what defines us as a nation is that we are one. Bechiras HaKadosh Baruch Hu, this fact that Hashem chose the Jewish people, he chose us as a whole, as a unit, as a one people, Ba'am Shalem U Me'uchad, as a whole and unified nation. He didn't choose us individually. He chose us as a whole, that this is the Jewish people, all of you, comprised of individuals, and the other parts of Torah that discusses the importance of the individual. But right now, what we're talking about is the importance of us as a whole, that God chose us as a unit. And therefore, when we have separation and disunity, it causes us to lose this maila, this advantage, this quality that we are chosen by Hashem as a unit, as a people. And therefore, Moshe was worried about their merit to be redeemed. Because it was in Mitzrayim that God chose us to choose us as a people. So if we're not acting like a people, if we don't see ourselves as a people, as a unified one unit, then how could they be redeemed when they're not even united? They're fighting each other. How can Hashem say, oh, I'm bringing you out of Egypt? Who's the you to bring out? So again, I think this Baruchnius really helps us understand that the greatest protection and merit that we have as a Jewish people is when we come together. Because God chose us as one, so we need to act as one. And as we said before, that is in contrast to what we believe in. Right? It doesn't matter. You serve Avodah Zarah, you don't serve Avodah Zarah, you do this Avera, you don't do this Avera, you keep mitzvahs, you don't. When it comes to God's choosing us as the Jewish people, it doesn't matter what you believe. What matters is that we see ourselves that way. And therefore, this is a little, okay. Therefore, this lack of unity was remedied. There was a tikkun. It was fixed. It was remedied through the hardship of slavery. The fact that the Jewish people were then enslaved, there was a lack of unity, but the slavery brought them together. The hardship, the suffering brought them together. Sheshavar es gaivasam. It broke their gaiva, right? Umamela their gaiva, meaning their haughtiness, their ego, right? Oh, there's me and there's you. But when we're all suffering together, there's no me and you. We're suffering together. We're suffering as a nation. And that, of course, we see that so clearly since October 7th, how the unity that happened immediately was unprecedented. Because when we suffer as a people. When we go through hardships, we unite. It brings us together. We do it together. And consequently, like naturally, automatically, this separation and division of their hearts is nullified, it melts away. When the Jewish people return to consolidate, the word is to unite with each other, to become one, as we again saw so clearly this year. When we're one, now we're worthy of being taken out of Egypt because of our suffering, of our slavery, because God chose us as an eternal nation, as a one people. And from this events of Yetzias Mitzrayim, we are no longer just a nation that believes in God, but rather we are Am Olam. We are an eternal nation, a nation that is not defined by what we do, but rather that we are. And I want to add a couple things in the 5 minutes that we have. So before anything, I want to add a video of Yossi Hershkowitz, Hashem Yikam Damam, that demo that he fell in Gaza. He was a soldier and he was killed in battle, and many weeks ago. And he happened to be my nephew's principal in Eretz Yisrael. He was a principal of a boys' school and an incredible educator and a truly special person. And just a few days before he was killed, he had a message that he wanted to share with the world, with the Jewish people. And this is his message. Where is it? And because you'll see that what I want to share here is literally what we have been saying. As a leader, as an educator, he was in tune with this. He understood this message. And what's crazy is that, again, you'll see, what does he pick on? He picks on Lashon Hara in particular. Listen to
אני רוצה לבקש בקשה. הולכת לתקופה לא קלה. אני מבקש בבקשה מכל אחד פה. דבר ראשון והכי חשוב לי אישית, אני מבקש בקשה אישית פה. לא להגיד לשון הרע על עם ישראל, שום דבר. אל תגידו מילה רעה, לא לחזור על מה שהיה לפני. כלום, אין שמאלני, אין ימני, אין חרדי, אין כלום. יש יהודים. החמאסניקים הנאצים לא הפריעו, לא עניין אותם. במה בחרת, במה אתה חושב. זה חשבון הנפש שצריך כל הזמן לשים לנו בראש. לא להגיד לשון הרע. תקופת אחאב, ישראל ניצחו את כל המלחמות שלהם בזכות שלא אמרו לשון הרע. אחד על השני. להתגבר בזה.
Wow. So you see that this is what he picks on. He picks on this in particular. He says, Lashon Hara is what separates us. It's what divides us. If we can speak negatively, or even as we saw in our hearts, if we look at our brothers and sisters in a way of like, this is I'm me and you're you and we're different and you're different than me, and we're not, that is what disintegrates us as a nation. And then Hashem looks down at the world and he doesn't see a nation. So the importance of unity is as we see specifically, especially during a time of suffering right now, that as we see is what helps us gain clarity to who we are. We're suffering as a nation. And therefore, in a time like this, it becomes clear that it's not about, your politics. It's not about what you believe in. It's not about if you're religious, you're not religious. It's not about any of that. It's not about whether the Jewish people were serving Avodah Zarah and Mitzrayim or not. It's about being united as one. We need to feel unified in our hearts. So I have less than 2 minutes, but I want to add one more piece that I literally just heard from Y.Y. Jacobson, a vart from Rabbi Yehoshua Leib Diskin of Brisk, a Rav of Brisk. And he says, Dasan and Aviram. These are the same Dasan and Aviram that we're saying Lashon Hara. By the end of the Parsha, what do we see? We see that the Shotrim, the police officers who were on top of the Jewish people, getting them to work their load, they were told by the taskmasters, the Egyptian taskmasters, the taskmasters were on top of the overseers, the Shotrim, and they were on top of the Jewish people. And the Jewish people were having trouble fulfilling their quota once the Egyptians added that they needed to also find their own straw. And therefore the Shotrim, these overseers, took a beating from the taskmasters, the Egyptians, because they took pity on the Jewish people. And the Rav of Brisk said, how is it that their Sha'im of Dasan and Aviram merited to be redeemed, even though we know that they were true Rishayim? It's because they were ready to be beaten for the Jewish people. And again, I realized this is at the end of the Parsha. The beginning, they're saying Lashon Hara, but then when their brothers and sisters are suffering, they have this tikkun, where all of a sudden they're taking a beating for them. That is the Jewish people. And Am Yisrael Chai, we should be united as ever. Have a beautiful, beautiful Shabbos. Thank you for learning with me.